I created the digital circus with idiots and fools as the target audience. Every time I find out that someone likes it and they're not a stupid or foolish person, I get so angry that I faint and hit my temple against the corner of a coffee table. This is a tweet made by Gooseworks, the creator of the digital circus, during the development of the ending of this series, and reading it felt very strange to me. I mean, nowadays most series are created with internet theories in mind, putting mysterious mysteries everywhere so that some idiot like me gives them free publicity with a video analysis. A loyal, smart, and analytical audience is the dream of any animation studio, and wanting the complete opposite is, at the very least, quite unusual, especially when the popularity of your series is due to the biblical amount of discussion it has generated on the internet. And the thing is, 2 days earlier, Gooseworks made this other tweet. People really take these stupid internet cartoons seriously, and they should. They're the most important thing in the world. In fact, you should kill someone for one of them, tonight. This is God, by the way, speaking directly to you and only you. Later on, we found out that she was very frustrated with Digital Circus, with the way the fans treated her, the ridiculous expectations they put on the show's plot, and with the physical and emotional burden the series meant for her. Still, it's strange she claims she made the series for herself, idiots and fools, that she doesn't want people to take her work seriously, and that she gets angry when people do, because it's inevitable that this will happen if the audience likes your work. And then there's the final episode. By the way, we're going to spoil the final episode completely here, so maybe you shouldn't watch the video until you go and see it. Seeing the general reaction online, I couldn't help but think that many people were expecting a better resolution to the mysteries of the circus, more plot twists, and a more satisfying conclusion. But if we take a closer look at what's beneath the surface, we'll notice that not only is a lot more explained than it seems, but more than half the internet misunderstood what they saw in the theater. Part 1. Albert Camus didn't have TikTok. I wrote this script 3 days after the theatrical release, but even before the ending was officially released, thanks to leaks, the vast majority of discussions were from people who were confused, disappointed, or outright upset about the ending. Now that it's been officially released, opinions are much more divided, and I was quite surprised, seeing that the general audience loved the ending, with the Rotten Tomatoes audience scored an excellent and unexpected 94 just a few days after the premiere. But even so, it's very common to come across comments from people frustrated by a multitude of factors, like how they didn't resolve their favorite character's story, how they brought a certain character back to life off screen without any explanation, or how they made Kane do a redemption speedrun in about 5 minutes after he had been slowly turning into a villain throughout the series. Just a heads up, the spoiler warning is serious. Watch the episode first. Obviously, Jax's fans had a really bad time because many believed that his cruel behavior was calculated, with him orchestrating an escape or acting like a clown as an elaborate strategy so the others wouldn't abstract, or having some positive trait to justify himself. And instead of that, he turned out to be exactly what he seemed, the worst traits of humanity concentrated in the avatar of a tragic purple rabbit who ends his life without really seeking help. Many were frustrated because Abstraction didn't turn out to be a secret method to escape, or even because the whole plot of escaping the circus ended up leading to nothing, with the final point of that narrative line being that they were digital copies trapped forever. Instead of a direct explanation or a galaxy-level plot twist, we had Kingar explaining the digital personality copies in the first 5 minutes, and that was as far as the explanation of the mysteries of the digital circus went. And yeah, I still have no idea what's up with Jax's irrational fear of corn. That being said, I have to say, I was really surprised when I went to the movies and realized that, in the real world, the audience loved the ending. I heard some people saying that maybe they needed more episodes, even just one dedicated to Kane's redemption, and I agree, but that was as far as the criticism went. It wasn't the apocalyptic talk that was all over the internet when the leaks happened. But, despite this, it's clear that very few people really understood what Gooseworks was trying to tell us with that ending. Let's rewind a bit. When I read those tweets from Gooseworks so many months ago, I was left with the impression that at no point was it their intention to make a mystery show. Of course, it has intrigue and unresolved elements like any good series, but if we pay attention to what the creator says, and not to the fandom's headcanons, it's more than obvious that the mystery isn't important to her. The point of the series, as she said from the beginning on her Tumblr, is that it's impossible to find meaning even in a stagnant life. So, from the beginning, it was very clear how it was going to end. In fact, a day after the premiere, she made this post on Blue Sky. The premiere was fun. Thank you and sorry to everyone for your support and for letting me make the show so personal and mentally ill and weird and sad. This is just one of the thousands of times she has mentioned or alluded to the fact that Digital Circus was a very personal show. If we go deeper, we can notice her doubts, personal struggles, and traumas in each of the characters. Gooseworks is a transgender woman who struggled a lot to reach her identity, and it's clear that her symbol represents that part of herself, with the dysphoria and alienation from her own body and the frustration of having a physical form subject to external misinterpretations. Gungle was stuck at work while she dreamed of making art on the internet, just like Gooseworks, who spent 5 years working at a McDonald's before being fired for her tardiness. And I can bet that the monotonous and inescapable cycle of working at a McDonald's for 5 years had something to do with the conceptualization of the circus as her representation of a very colorful existential prison. This is just the surface of everything we can analyze if we look at the show more as a character study than as a mystery show, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. The real problem is that her intentions were one thing, and what she actually did was something very different. The first episode focuses entirely on Centra, the mystery of the exit, Kaufmo's obsession with escaping, and Pomni finding C%A's computer, and it leaves us with the questions of what the circus is, how they got there, and how they'll escape, but none of that turns out to be important. Even episode 7 seems to directly mock the idea of exploring these mysteries, making it clear that it's about the interpersonal relationships between the characters. This aspect also falls short, as much development occurs off-screen, a pattern repeated with Jax's abstraction in the final episode. All of this happens when you take a teenage and obsessive audience and mix it with a bunch of clues and hints that ultimately lead nowhere. Like the thing about the number 57 or the "I have no mouth and I must scream" reference, and you keep feeding it, episode after episode. Well, it's no surprise that the fandom expected the last episodes to resolve all those elements that got them interested in the series in the first place. On the other hand, I think this obsession with answers, with finally figuring out what's happening and escaping the circus, was actually one of the show's interesting ideas. The circus was actually a narrative tool in the series. It's obvious that the circus represents a place where life goes on in a stagnant way and without any real possible purpose, where everything is endless, colorful escapism, with silly adventures full of artificial dopamine, in an elaborate allegory of the existential horrors of the modern world. Wanting to escape and solve the mystery isn't truly the goal or victory, it's just an illusion. It's how the characters tried to control a reality they didn't like. According to Gooseworks and the Digital Circus, the meaning of existence is found in building a community, in learning to deal with what you can't control, and finding a purpose in a deeply imperfect, mundane, and repetitive reality. Or as Albert Camus said, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, now knowing that all of this reflects Gooseworks' personal traumas and experiences, and that this is a work that deals precisely with the traumas and experiences of these characters. I find it very interesting that the character she identifies with the most, the one most similar to her and her self-insert in the show, is Jax. That reveals much about her traumas and life after seeing the last episode, especially since she said writing the show helps her exorcise past demons. It's not hard to understand that, at some point in her life, she saw herself as someone with those same deep flaws that Jax shows, pushing all her friends out of her life and hurting the people who cared about her because of her own internalized hatred. But if we know that Jax is based on herself and is the one she identifies with the most, shouldn't Jax be trans? Well, guess what, you idiot. Part 2, or the section where you say, "No way, I didn't notice that." If you're in the fandom and your life centers on the series, you likely know the theory since it gained traction after the last episode, which already had some hints. Jax had a pretty fragile masculinity, constantly overcompensating, mentioning how masculine he is, and bullying the girls, mainly reacting in an absurdly exaggerated way when he's forced to dress as a maid. And we also have that scene where he loses his skin as if it were a costume, something he puts on to hide his true self. But the real evidence that made me completely sure that the point of Jax is that he represents Gooseworks before transitioning came in episode 9. You see, I actually didn't even know about the theory before watching the ending. I had seen some discussion online, but nothing more. So, what first made me realize that something was off was when Stevie Wonder's song, Isn't She Lovely, played during the montage about Jax's life in the circus. At first I thought, that must have been an expensive song for the studio. Why did they pick that one? And then I remembered that the lyrics of the song are about the birth of a woman, and I let out a loud sigh. I set that idea aside for a few minutes, but then, later on, it's revealed that Leroy, Jax's real-world counterpart, regularly goes to the LGBT bar in Sub El Real, the Triangle Bar. So I went straight home to Google it, and there's a ton of extra evidence. There's some evidence that's a bit weak, like Gooseworks mentioning that Leroy was obsessed with Disney's Ariel when he was a kid, or a joke on Twitter that Jax thinks progesterone makes you better at gambling. But it gets interesting when we notice that Jax's room is full of feminine costumes and decorations, and it directly has the colors of the trans flag. Jax also makes a joke about not being an egg, which is a term for someone who's trans but hasn't come out of their shell yet. And there's also the part where Jax mentions that his ears and tail are the pinnacle of masculinity, only to then discover that he lost his tail, something suspicious. Later on, I watched the movie again, and if you look at Rivet and Jax's conversation with this in mind, it becomes very obvious what happened. Jax mentions that his mother used to tell him he wasn't man enough like his father, obviously. That when she got upset, it was even worse. Then he mentions that, in the conversation, Jax shared a personal secret, hoping she would stop comparing him to his father. But it got even worse. She mocked him, humiliated him, and insulted him for this. But then she hugged him. I think it's more than obvious that what he told her was related to his masculinity or lack of it, because only something like that would justify such exaggerated reactions from his mother. Jax's final aggression, after so much abuse and confusion, and why Jax? He prefers not to say what the argument was about, although he does mention that the argument started because of his mother's expectations about his manhood. And then, Ribet responds by putting her little bow on him and saying that his secret is safe with her, with Jax blushing. Ribet understood what was happening, understood that living with the mother who constantly questioned his masculinity eventually led him to confront her with the idea that maybe he wasn't the man his mother wanted. And that explains Jax's extreme reactions after opening up so much to Ribet. He just didn't want to face the reality of what it means to imagine. Man, become a man? What if Jax turns Jax? What if Jax becomes someone who is going through an identity crisis? I mean, Jax is still a man until he decides he doesn't want to be anymore. So I find it at least ironic that there are people online assuming his pronouns and calling him she. But putting that detail aside, I think we're already starting to understand a lot of things about the ending. Yes, there were execution errors and a lot of unresolved mysteries and clues that led nowhere. But the reality is that this is a show made by a trans person who is expressing their experiences, traumas, and mistakes through their characters and stories. Trying to pretend it's something else is absurd. This makes Jax's death even more profound and explains to us why there's that curious juxtaposition with Kane and his redemption, especially because Gooseworks has mentioned that Jax and Kane were modeled after their own flaws. I know there were a lot of people who complained because it seems like the movie is telling us that Jax was doomed to die. That's not the case. And it's that Jax had a will, man. A will. Jax is a man who... And we find out that he withdrew, but the point is that Jax was indeed redeemable. Jax could have been saved, but it's no one's responsibility but his own. Jax knows he's made mistakes. He knows he's fallible, and he clearly regrets how he hurts others, but he doesn't fix it. Even though those people he's hurt are more than willing to help him with his problems. He doesn't try, he doesn't change his behavior, and just continues his destructive actions, using the people around him and then discarding them without considering their feelings and without really trying to reach out and seek help. He is immature, inconsistent, cowardly, and lives in constant denial. The other lesson from the show is that Jax's real mistake wasn't being fallible or traumatized. We are all fallible and traumatized, although at different levels. His mistake was not loving himself enough to seek help. It shows us the ultimate consequences when someone like that refuses to seek help, to fix their mistakes, to accept their own fallibility, and to gather the courage to change the course of their life, hurting themselves and others in one final act of pure selfishness, which is exactly the opposite of what Kane did. He accepted his responsibility, changed his attitude, and tried to make things better in the best way possible. In this way, he found meaning in a stagnant life, which brings us to the final plot twist. Despite everything I just said, another point that everyone seems to ignore is that Jax is not dead, even though if he were, it would be a perfect thematic inversion of I have no mouth and I must scream. On one hand, Leroy did manage to continue in the real world. He was able to rely on his friends and on a community that helps and understands him, since he is now part of the queer community at Subo's bar and seems to be on a positive path for his life. But on the other hand, Pomni discovers that the true nature of abstractions isn't really death, and that it's possible to enter an abstraction and communicate with the person in question. The word abstraction refers to a cognitive process that simplifies complex ideas, reducing them to their most fundamental elements, discarding specific details in favor of general concepts. It seems that what happens when someone becomes abstracted is that the structure of the personality files of each circus member loses its integrity and reverts to its basic components. Sure, on the outside it's an aggressive monster that acts only on instinct, but in reality, it's a human being who has lost their sense of self and is constantly drowning in the ocean of their own consciousness. This point is infinitely important because it not only lets us understand that now everyone can visit the previous circus members who have already become abstracted, but also that there might be a way to fix abstraction in the future. And even if there isn't, they're not dead, which is why that final image of those three abstractions swimming together seems so beautiful to me. I like to think that they're Rivet, Kaufmo, and Jax finally reconciled, so I hope you enjoyed this video. That last episode was really beautiful, and I'm glad that such a personal and honest work managed to resonate with so many people, even though it has its own internal problems. I should also mention that the Instagram and YouTube profiles and all that shown at the end of the movie are real, so it's possible that the story will continue through them. But for now, I think I'll consider the amazing digital circus finished. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more videos like this, and remember that if you identify with Jax, you're not doomed to abstraction. Not really. Goodbye.